All rise, please.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Brice, I have a couple of topics, or perhaps more than a couple, to ask some supplementary questions, if I may. The first is the safe house. In your evidence before lunch, you said that it made sense to have an alternative, to have a second safe house. Can I ask this? Was the thinking behind that to avoid unwelcome attention when there were frequent visitors, as in the officers, to those premises?
Yes, of course. And also, of course, if we had to vacate, probably because of that reason, we had another place to go to.
Next topic, please, is back to HN 294, your chief inspector when you joined. You drew the contrast with David Bicknell that, does it boil down to this? HN 294 wasn't particularly approachable, but Mr. Bicknell was.
Yes.
What about the manner of HN 294 and his style of management made him unapproachable? Can you help us with that, please?
Well, I was going to say he was less approachable because I think it was just his personality. He came across to me as a fairly dour sort of individual who probably kept a lot to himself. That does sound unfair to saying that now because sadly he's passed away. But I think that was, in other words, we had a working relationship, but it wasn't the greatest. But I hope it was functioned anyway.
Did you observe an impact, if any, then on how the officers would be able to interact with him and their relations?
Well, I don't know how they would not directly interact with him on a regular basis. Where he would become more involved if something emanated from one of those officers, perhaps through myself, where I needed to take him on board as well because of his rank. I'm not aware that I wasn't aware that he ever came to the safe house because that wasn't his particular job.
You agreed with Mr. Greenslade's assessment in this that he ran the unit as a fiefdom. Can you explain what it was about how he ran the unit that it came to be described in that way?
Well, yes, I wouldn't exactly use the term fiefdom, but I know what Mr. Greenslade means. Well, I think the expression is he sort of kept his cards close to his chest. That was just the way he did things, and some of us operate in an entirely different way. So.
Thank you. Can we move on to HN 45, who we spoke about?
Yes.
Do you have recollection of him being on the SDS when you were?
Yes.
You said much earlier in the questions and answers today that you couldn't help with the compromise that led to HN 45 being withdrawn. Does it follow that you can't help with the timing of when that happened?
Well, I wasn't aware of a compromise, and so I don't think I can answer any further that particular issue.
Can we move on, please, to the topic of deceased children's identities? I want to take you back to when you were on the bomb squad in 1972. Did you use undercover identities on that squad?
No.
Can you recall whether Geoffrey Kraft was on the bomb squad at any point?
Not in my time.
Now, I've asked you many questions today about a period of your life some 50 years ago, and it follows that recollection is sometimes unclear. What I want to deal with, please, is when I was asking you questions about your involvement in any, if any, with instructing your officers to go to Somerset House to develop their undercover identity, your recollection was clear that it wasn't you, and you didn't have any discussion with Mr. Bicknell about the use of deceased children's identities. Are you able to help with how you can be clear and confident on that particular topic?
I was never aware of that actual occurrence taking place. It wasn't something that was ever in my mind. I don't recall being asked about, if we're talking about passports particularly, about getting passports. And I have a hunch that this was taking place after I left SDS. It wasn't something I was ever concerned with and ever came across, and certainly ever instructed anybody to do.
Thank you, Mr. Brice. A couple of more questions on this practice, and then we'll move on to the final topic. Were you aware at the time of a criminal case involving a person who'd used a deceased child's identity being discussed within the SDS?
No.
Do you remember the book, The Day of the Jackal, being published?
I think The Day of the Jackal is when it first came to my notice.
Can you just expand a little on that, please? What do you mean when it first came to my notice?
Well, isn't that the book where this false identity is outlined?
Are you aware of that book being discussed in Special Branch in the SDS?
Not to my knowledge.
Does it follow, do you recall it having any influence on how cover identities were to be developed at the time?
No, I wasn't aware of it at the time.
Mr. Brice, can we move on, please, to the final topic, and taking you back to relationships that undercover officers engaged in. I was dealing with whether there was at least the appreciation of a risk by mid-1974 that officers may engage in intimate relationships. And you said that, well, there's always a risk. And certainly, tell me if I'm right, the impression is that a great deal of trust was placed in these officers. Is that fair?
Yes.
I want to clarify from your evidence, please. Did you appreciate that that risk existed at the time when you were on the SDS or subsequently?
No.
Sorry, when you say no, did you appreciate it at the time back in 73, 74?
Of what? Of a risk or a rift?
A risk, sorry, of a risk of officers engaging in inappropriate and intimate relationships.
Well, there must be, in human terms, always a risk. But it wasn't something that occupied my thought processes when I was on the SDS.
Other than married men being recruited, were you aware of any measures which were put in place to mitigate any potential risks of officers getting too involved in the groups that they were infiltrating?
I wasn't aware of anything, no.
Hindsight is perhaps a great thing, but with the benefit of hindsight, do you think more could have been done at the time to alleviate such a risk?
Well, of course, with the benefit of hindsight, one might be able to come up with something. But I think the fact is that when we were trying to emphasize the fact that we were recruiting mainly married people with this, what I described as a stable and secure background, that was maybe inadvertently a way of preventing, nothing's 100% in this world, of that sort of occurrence coming to light. So I think we were doing the best we could at that time. I think that's the best I can do with that.
Thank you. This is the final point and the final question, that a reputation of an officer as a womanizer would, if I've understood you correctly, be of relevance to the issue of integrity and trust of an officer.
Well, if you had a list of pointers, I think if I saw that, it would obviously raise questions in my mind about, well, I think I was trying to say this before, about my judgment in recommending him for that type of work, because there was obviously a bigger risk than if he wasn't a womanizer, if you follow my track there. And I think it's as simple as that. It's not something that I would have, as it were, gone along with or brushed over, really. I think it's something that would have been quite important to me in deciding on what would happen.
Would your concern have been greater regarding a married officer that had such a reputation, or a single officer with such a reputation, or no difference?
Well, of course, I think on moral grounds, you would have to say that you take that more seriously if it was a married officer. But I don't want particularly to moralise on this, because that was the way I felt at the time. I think the fact we were choosing those married officers was a way of, we wouldn't have chosen them if they'd have had that reputation anyway. So, married or single.
Thank you, Mr. Brice. Those are all the questions that I have.
Thank you.
Is there any re-examination? No, thank you. Mr. Brice, I want to ask you about one topic that you've not, I think, been asked about so far. Can I ask you to bear in mind, please, that the documents we have suggest that HN 294 was replaced by Derek Neal sometime between March and May 1974.
Yes.
The documents we have, the last one for HN 294 is March, the first for Derek Neal is May.
Yes.
And in 1974, there was a particularly striking and grim event which occurred on the 15th of June 1974. Do you know of what I speak, or would you like me to remind you further?
I've not heard of that, sir.
The disturbance in Red Lion Square, which led to a death, the death of Kevin Gately.
Yes.
Does that ring a bell?
I can recall an incident in Red Lion Square, but I can only recall it because of your reminding me now.
Yes, but does my reminding you now remind you that a young man did die in that
Yes.
incident, and there was an inquiry by Lord Justice Scarman into the circumstances of his death?
Yes.
Do you remember that now, do you?
Well, I don't remember any more detail than that.
Yeah, right. Now, could I ask that document MPS 07300906 is put up on the screen at page 13. Can you see that? And can I
Yes,
tell
I
you what
can.
it is? It's a document, the annual report, signed by Derek Neal, dated 4th February 1975. So it covers the year 1974.
Yes.
And if you'd read, please, paragraph 20, could that be put up under review? Just read that to yourself, if you would.
Yes.
You see the sentence that says, fortunately, the SDS gave forewarning of both the size of the demonstration and the possible disorder which might occur.
Yes.
You are the only person who then had managerial responsibility within the SDS who is still alive, and I was wondering if you could help me about what was done to forewarn uniformed officers about the possibility of disorder in Red Lion Square.
I'm very sorry, sir, but I've never seen that report until it's been shown to me now, and I can't regrettably shed any information on that point at all.
Well, forget being shown the report for the first time now. Does what it says, that the SDS gave forewarning of both sides of the demonstration, both the size of the demonstration and the possible disorder which might occur, does that ring any bell?
It doesn't ring any bell with that incident. I mean, but being able to provide the information, that would not surprise me.
Yeah. The inquiry has not been able to retrieve any documents containing that information in advance of the Red Lion Square incident. It may be that the documents did exist and have got lost, but is there an alternative possibility that information was communicated orally?
Well, not as far as I know, sir.
Your recollection is that intelligence reports always went or were confirmed in writing?
Yes.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions arising out of that? No. Thank you very much, Mr. Brice, for coming and giving evidence. Your evidence is now complete. I'm grateful to you for doing so. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Right. That, I think, concludes today's evidence, does it not? We will have, I anticipate, a rather fuller day tomorrow. So can everybody please be here on time to start promptly at 10?